So now let's create a card out of this one here. So we're going to create this card here. So this is glossy cardstock. And remember how I said you couldn't use heat embossing on Yupo paper? You can absolutely use it on glossy cardstock. So that is what we're going to do. First thing we're going to do is stamp this season's greeting stamp. It comes with that poinsettia stamp. So we are going to use some sticky embossing ink. I've got Versamark here. You want an ink that's going to stay wet long enough to hold that powder while you're using the heat gun with it. So press your sentiment firmly so you get a good impression of your image. Pour the powder on there. And I've got a little bit of gold powder that is sticking around that stamped image that shouldn't be there, and it's probably, I probably touched it with my fingers, and you've got oils in your fingers, so it probably is sticking to that. So before I go and emboss it, I'm taking a soft brush here and I'm just brushing that stuff away. If I leave it there, it's just going to melt with the rest of the embossing powder and will not be able to be removed. So some of it is so close to the stamped image that I'm not going close to it. I don't want to ruin my stamped image, but anything that I can get out with a soft brush I will, just because it'll give a cleaner embossed image. There we go, that's better. Let's close the cap on the powder so we don't get it all over the surface like I just did. All right, and now I'm going to use the heat embosser and I'm going to melt it. You can do it on top or you can do it below. I tend to do both just because the heat sometimes warps the paper, and by doing it underneath as well, that kind of evens it out a little bit. Make sure also that you're doing this away from your hand. There we go. So you can see how the paper warped a little bit, and that's really fine. It's going to be flattened when we glue it down anyways, but I do try to go underneath to let it flatten on its own. All right, so I've got that same glossy paper that I used for the sentiment for the last card, and I'm also using it for the mat around the image piece. It just highlights the gold that's in there, and I think it's a really nice frame, especially on holiday cards. Oops. There we go. Now really this image could be left like this, just add a bit of stickles, a little bit of sparkle, but I thought it'd be better to add some die cuts and just add some dimension to it. So I've got some greens here that I cut out of green cardstock. Could have been the same, or could have been cut out of the same gold as the last one, but I thought let's do something a little bit different. And this is actually a little bit too long for what I want, so I'm going to, don't be afraid to break and to make your die cuts a little bit smaller to fit whatever project you're working on. Nothing says that you have to use it as is, complete the way it's die cut. So I definitely do, when I do break them up, I try to break them up in an area that it's not going to be noticeable. So I wouldn't want to take, say, a silhouette, a big silhouette, and just rip it in half. I want to make it sure that it's not noticeable that that was done, but easy to do on ones like these greenery ones here. All right, so we've got the brass from the alcohol ink print and the gold around the outside and the gold embossing. It just all ties in together. And now just to tie it in just a little bit more, I clearly had some red alcohol ink on my hand that I just transferred over, so make sure to wash your hands. Some of this is just stain and it won't come out, but I got busy with other stuff and I didn't make sure the alcohol ink was off my hand. So I'm going to use some platinum stickles again, just in the center of that flower. And like I said before, I typically just kind of do dots. I want to make sure that it's not just one even area. I kind of like it to look a little bit more like a poinsettia, the way those centers are. So there is our card. That's the way the stickles look when they're wet, but once they're dry, they flatten out a little bit, and then you'll see really a lot more sparkle. Now, while it's on my mind, that smudge that I got from my finger there, there's no way to remove it completely, but what I can do is I can take some isopropyl alcohol and rub it on there, and that's going to kind of bleach it out a little bit so it's not as noticeable. And actually it was light enough that it did completely remove it. The one thing though is you don't want to go near the embossing, because the alcohol ink or the alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, will start to degrade that. But look at, it's completely gone there. So if by chance you happen to do that, try that. Use some isopropyl alcohol, spray it away from your project, or put a little bit from your dropper. I didn't want to use this because I had already gotten some of the crimson in there, so it's not completely clear. Put it on your surface, use something small that you have control, and try to remove it.